We live in a world that celebrates connection. We're told that closeness builds bonds, fuels collaboration, and drives innovation. But today, I invite you to consider a paradox that distance, not just proximity, can be a source of power. In a world obsessed with constant contact, strategic distance might just be the key to clarity, growth, and transformation. The power of distance lies not in escape, but in perspective. Whether it's stepping back from a problem, detaching from emotional turmoil, or gaining space from societal noise, distance enables us to see more, feel less pressure, and act with wisdom. Distance can be physical, emotional, intellectual, or digital, and when used intentionally, it transforms. It changes how we think, how we connect, how we lead, and how we live. In a world that moves at breakneck speed, where multitasking is often mistaken for productivity, clarity has become a rare commodity. We are constantly surrounded by noise, notifications, conversations, deadlines, and expectations. Amid all this, we are expected to make decisions, solve problems, and maintain our composure. But how often do we pause? How often do we deliberately choose to step back? Because the truth is, clarity, real, deep, lasting clarity, rarely comes from being immersed. It comes from space. When we are too close to something, we lose sight of the whole. It's like looking at a painting from 2 inches away. All you see are brushstrokes and color smudges. Only when you take a few steps back does the image begin to make sense. The same applies to life. Whether it's a personal conflict, a career dilemma, or a major life decision, being too close, too emotionally invested, too reactive, too hurried often clouds our judgment. Distance creates a vantage point. It helps us see things as they are, not as we fear or assume them to be. Psychologically, this phenomenon is supported by the idea of cognitive diffusion, the process of detaching from our thoughts so we can observe them more objectively. It doesn't mean we avoid our feelings or ignore our problems. It means we put enough space between ourselves and the issue to assess it clearly. That space might come from physical distance, going for a walk, traveling, or even just stepping out of the room. It might come from emotional distance, taking time before responding, writing instead of speaking, or confiding in someone who isn't directly involved. Clarity through distance also applies to creative work. Writers, artists, designers, and strategists often talk about the power of stepping away from their projects. Sometimes, after staring at a problem for hours, the best solution appears only when we stop looking. It's not magic, it's neuroscience. The brain continues to process information subconsciously. This is called the default mode network when we're at rest, daydreaming, or not actively focused. That's why so many aha moments happen in the shower or on a quiet walk. In relationships, clarity also emerges when we give ourselves breathing room. Heated conversations, misunderstandings, or emotional entanglements can trap us in a fog of overthinking and assumption. By creating some space, even temporarily, we give ourselves time to reflect on what really matters, what is being said versus what is being felt, and what role we may be playing in the confusion. That gap between stimulus and response, as Viktor Frankl wisely said, is where our power lies. Moreover, stepping back doesn't mean giving up. It means reassessing with intention. It's not a retreat, but a reset. When we step back, we can ask better questions. What is truly important here? What am I not seeing? What assumptions am I making? These questions are hard to answer in the heat of the moment, but distance makes room for deeper insight. Perspective is often the difference between confusion and clarity, and that perspective is almost impossible to gain without distance. Even in team environments or business settings, stepping back can lead to breakthroughs. Leaders who are constantly involved in the minutiae can become blinded by urgency. But those who step back, who zoom out, can identify trends, see the cracks before they widen, and make decisions that align with long-term vision rather than short-term panic. Clarity at the leadership level is rarely about more information. It's about better interpretation, and interpretation thrives in spaciousness, not saturation. Ultimately, clarity is not the result of pushing harder or thinking faster. It is often born in the pause, the quiet, the act of letting go long enough to see the bigger picture. When we give ourselves that space, both mentally and physically, the fog begins to lift, thoughts untangle, priorities realign, truth emerges. Clarity comes not from being in the thick of everything, but from learning when to step away and look again. Human emotions are powerful forces. They influence how we think, how we act, how we relate to others, and even how we perceive reality. But as powerful as emotions are, they are not always accurate. In fact, when we are too emotionally entangled in a situation, we can lose our ability to respond wisely. We become reactive, impulsive, and often regretful. This is where the power of distance plays a critical role. Creating emotional distance doesn't mean suppressing or denying how we feel. It means giving ourselves the space to regulate those feelings before they take control. Emotional regulation begins with awareness. You cannot manage what you cannot name. But when you're caught in the heat of anger, fear, jealousy, or sadness, everything feels immediate and urgent. That's when stepping back emotionally and mentally becomes essential. It could mean removing yourself physically from a heated conversation, taking a few moments of silence before responding to a triggering message, or journaling to sort through your emotions before acting on them. This distance interrupts the cycle of reactivity and gives you a moment to breathe, observe, and realign. Think of emotional distance like a pause button. When we are too close to an emotion, it becomes our whole world. But when we pause and create some psychological space, we shift from being inside the emotion to observing it from the outside. This small shift can have a massive impact. Suddenly, you're not consumed by anger, you're noticing anger. You're not overwhelmed by anxiety, you're watching it rise and fall like a wave. And in that watching, that observing, you regain control. You remember that emotions are data, not directives. Science supports this process. The practice of mindfulness and techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy often emphasize emotional distancing, sometimes called decentering or detachment. These practices allow us to respond to emotions with curiosity instead of judgment, with patience instead of panic. Emotional regulation isn't about eliminating feelings. It's about changing our relationship with them, and distance provides the necessary separation for this transformation to happen. In relationships, emotional regulation through distance can preserve trust and respect. When tensions rise, whether in a friendship, romantic relationship, or workplace dynamic, reacting emotionally can create lasting damage. Words said in anger, decisions made in fear, or actions taken in jealousy can't always be undone. But when you recognize the moment your emotions start to surge, and you choose to pause to create space, you protect both yourself and others. You give the relationship room to breathe instead of letting it suffocate under the weight of unchecked emotion. Distance can also help us reframe emotional narratives. Sometimes we tell ourselves stories that fuel negative emotions. They don't care about me. I always mess things up. Or this will never get better. These narratives are often rooted in emotion, not fact. By stepping back, we give ourselves a chance to challenge those stories. Is there another way to see this? What else might be true here? What would I tell a friend in this situation? These are questions we can rarely ask in the emotional thick of things, but distance creates the space for these shifts in perspective. Another crucial aspect of emotional regulation through distance is self-compassion. When we allow ourselves space to feel without judgment, we open the door to healing. Too often, we're harsh with ourselves. We criticize our emotions, label them as weaknesses, or try to fix ourselves prematurely. But creating emotional distance gives us the grace to say, "It's okay to feel this," without being consumed by it. This gentle detachment fosters resilience and emotional maturity. It teaches us that feeling deeply and staying grounded are not mutually exclusive. Ultimately, emotional regulation is not about becoming cold or detached in a harmful way. It's about developing the discipline of distance, the ability to step back emotionally, so that we can show up more wisely. It's a skill that must be practiced, not just understood. But once developed, it changes how we relate to everything, our thoughts, our reactions, our conflicts, and our choices. Distance, when used with intention, becomes a gateway to emotional intelligence, and from that place, we make decisions not just from emotion, but from wisdom. In an age dominated by collaboration, brainstorming sessions, and open plan offices, the idea that creativity thrives in solitude may seem counterintuitive. We are told that innovation happens in groups, that synergy is the secret to great ideas, and that connection fuels imagination. While there's truth in collective thinking, we often forget the quieter, more powerful truth. Some of the most profound creativity arises when we are alone. Solitude, not distraction or noise, is the womb in which original thought is born and nurtured. When we are surrounded by people, conversation, and constant interaction, our minds tend to mirror the thoughts and energies of others. While this can be stimulating, it can also dilute our inner voice. In solitude, that voice gets louder, clearer, more honest. We stop performing. We stop filtering our thoughts through the lens of approval. We simply think, feel, and create. In this sense, distance not just from others, but from external validation becomes a sacred space for raw and authentic expression. Creativity is not just about generating ideas. It's about listening to ideas as they form, slowly and silently, often below the surface. Solitude creates the mental space for that process. In quiet, unhurried moments, we are more likely to tap into the subconscious, that deep reservoir of memory, intuition, and inspiration. Artists, writers, inventors, and philosophers throughout history have retreated into solitude not to escape the world, but to understand it differently, to reimagine it, to reframe what others could not see. There's a reason why the phrase "a room of one's own," coined by Virginia Woolf, has endured for so long. She wasn't just talking about physical space, she was referring to the psychological and emotional distance necessary for women, and by extension, all creators, to explore their inner landscapes without interruption. Solitude is not loneliness, it is presence with oneself, with one's thoughts, with the untapped potential waiting to be shaped into something new. In solitude, inward exploration becomes possible, and that is where creativity finds its depth. Modern life, however, resists solitude. We are addicted to connection. Notifications, emails, social media, group chats, they fill our mental bandwidth to the point where solitude feels uncomfortable, even threatening. But this discomfort is precisely why solitude is powerful. When we push through the initial silence, the boredom, the itch to check our phone, we enter a space that is rarely visited, the stillness of focused thought. And in that space, we begin to create not just more, but better, not just louder, but deeper. Great creative breakthroughs often occur when we remove ourselves from the noise. Think of the poet who isolates herself in a cabin for the weekend, the composer who walks alone in the forest, the scientist who finds answers during an early morning commute in silence. These moments are not accidents. They are the result of intentional distance, of choosing solitude not as a luxury, but as a discipline. The absence of others makes room for presence with an idea, a question, a vision. Solitude becomes a collaborator, not an obstacle. Even for those who do thrive in collaboration, solitude plays a vital complementary role. The brainstorming room may spark the flame, but it is in solitude that the fire is tended. Ideas need to be shaped, challenged, and developed in the private space of reflection. Without that time alone, ideas often remain shallow echoes of others, not fully formed thoughts. Solitude allows creators to wrestle with their own minds, to sit in ambiguity, to discover what they really want to say, make, or build. Ultimately, creativity that lasts, the kind that resonates, that disrupts, that moves, is not the result of constant activity, but of intentional stillness. Solitude is not a withdrawal from the world, but a preparation to re-enter it with something meaningful. The power of distance in this context is not about isolation for its own sake, but about creating the conditions for creation where ideas are born not out of noise, but out of listening, waiting, and daring to sit alone long enough for something original to appear. We live in an age where our lives are tethered to screens. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, we are bombarded by notifications, emails, messages, likes, alerts, and pings. The digital world has become our default environment, shaping how we think, how we communicate, how we rest, and how we relate to ourselves. But with constant connection comes a heavy cost: mental fatigue, fractured attention, shallow thinking, and emotional overstimulation. This is why digital distance or detox isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. It is a form of reclaiming sovereignty over our own minds. The myth that we must always be available, always responsive, always plugged in, is one of the most dangerous lies of the modern world. It creates a culture where urgency is mistaken for importance and speed is mistaken for intelligence. The truth is, when we are constantly online, we rarely have time to think deeply or feel fully. We're reacting, scrolling, consuming, not living. A digital detox, even if just for a few hours or a weekend, allows the brain to reset. It gives our nervous system a chance to downshift, to breathe, to return to a natural rhythm that is not dictated by algorithms. There's a psychological term for what many experience online: continuous partial attention. It describes the state of being always sort of present, never fully here, never fully gone. It's exhausting. It fragments focus, reduces cognitive performance, and increases anxiety. But what happens when we turn it all off, even temporarily? Silence returns, depth returns. We start to notice what's around us, the way sunlight falls on the floor, the expressions on people's faces, the thoughts that rise when there's no noise to drown them. We return to our senses, and in doing so, we return to ourselves. Many people fear digital detox because it feels like disconnection, but the irony is, disconnecting digitally often leads to reconnecting emotionally and spiritually. When we unplug from the artificial noise of the online world, we become more attuned to the inner world we've been ignoring. We begin to ask deeper questions. What do I actually want? What am I running from with all this distraction? Who am I when no one is watching, liking, or commenting? These questions don't arise when we're glued to our devices. They surface in the space created by intentional distance. Moreover, our attention is not just a resource, it is our life. What we give our attention to, moment by moment, becomes the substance of our existence. If we spend our days distracted, our lives become fragmented. Digital detox is a radical act of reclaiming that attention. It's a decision to be deliberate about where our energy flows. It's a protest against the commodification of our focus. Every minute we're not giving to a screen is a minute returned to what's real: conversations, silence, nature, books, creativity, rest, breath. Creativity, rest, and relationships all suffer under the weight of constant digital noise. True intimacy, whether with oneself or with others, requires presence, and presence cannot coexist with constant distraction. A conversation punctuated by glances at a phone is not a conversation, it's a performance. A walk in the park spent checking emails is not a walk, it's a relocation of the office. Digital detox allows us to experience life as it is, not through a filtered lens or a curated feed. It brings us back into the immediacy of the present moment where life actually happens. There's also a physical cost to digital immersion: disrupted sleep, eye strain, shallow breathing, poor posture, and overstimulation of the brain's reward system. These effects accumulate quietly, often unnoticed, until they become chronic. A detox is not just about reducing screen time, it's about interrupting the addictive cycle of consumption and reactivity. It's about recalibrating the body and mind toward balance. When we take a break from the digital, we often notice how addicted we've become, and that recognition can be the first step toward healing. Perhaps most importantly, digital detox is not about rejecting technology, but about redefining our relationship with it. Technology is a tool, powerful, useful, even beautiful when used with intention. But when it uses us, when it dictates our emotions, habits, and sense of worth, it becomes a prison disguised as convenience. Distance gives us the chance to become conscious again, to choose how, when, and why we engage. It reminds us that we are not machines. We are living, breathing, feeling beings who sometimes need silence, stillness, and space more than another scroll, swipe, or screen. We often associate growth with constant action, relentless effort, and a visible, measurable grind. Our culture glorifies hustle, urgency, and staying on the path no matter what. But what if real growth doesn't always happen in the doing, but in the stepping away? What if the most profound transformations take root not while we're pushing forward, but when we take a conscious pause, a detour, a retreat, a breath? Growth, like nature, often works in cycles, and sometimes the most important part of that cycle is stepping back in order to rise. There is wisdom in withdrawal. Trees drop their leaves in the fall, not as a sign of death, but as preparation for rebirth. Muscles grow not during the workout, but during the recovery. Seeds sprout not in the light, but after a period of being buried in the dark. These natural metaphors remind us that stepping away is not a failure or regression, it is part of the growth process itself. We, too, need seasons of rest, reflection, and distance to process what we've learned, to internalize changes, and to evolve from experience. When we stay too close to a routine, a relationship, a project, or even a version of ourselves, we risk stagnation. Familiarity can breed comfort, but it can also breed complacency. Growth demands disruption. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is walk away, not out of avoidance, but out of respect for our own evolution. Stepping away creates space for recalibration. It helps us ask, is this still right for me? Have I outgrown this situation? What does the next version of myself need? Distance also challenges our identity. When we're immersed in a role, whether it's a job, a social label, or a relationship dynamic, we tend to conflate our identity with that role. Stepping away allows us to observe who we are outside of it. Who am I when I'm not performing? Who am I when I'm not needed or seen or praised? These are uncomfortable but essential questions, and they only emerge when we create enough distance from the familiar to hear our inner voice, not the echoes of other people's expectations. This space also fosters resilience. It's in the distance that we learn to rely on our inner resources. When we step away from external validation, we begin to cultivate internal grounding. When we walk away from constant doing, we discover the value of just being. And in that being, something new starts to grow: clarity, strength, direction. Stepping away allows life to catch up with us. It gives us room to feel what we've been avoiding, to heal what we've been suppressing, and to imagine futures we hadn't yet considered. Growth is not linear. It's not a straight staircase to success or self-actualization. It's a spiral, often requiring us to circle back, to pause, to reflect, to undo. Stepping away doesn't always mean a grand exit. Sometimes it's simply about taking a break from the noise, the striving, the expectations. A walk, a weekend alone, a break from a toxic pattern. These small acts of distance can have profound effects. They are invitations to return stronger, clearer, more aligned with who we are becoming. The fear, of course, is that by stepping away we'll fall behind. We'll lose momentum, we'll be forgotten, we'll miss out. But the truth is, growth is not a race. What matters is not how fast we move, but how true our movement is. Sometimes stepping away is the very thing that positions us for our next leap forward. It's the deep breath before the bold move. It's the moment of stillness before the storm of transformation. In that space, something powerful happens. We get to choose our direction rather than just be pulled by inertia. More than anything, stepping away is a declaration of trust in the process, in time, in ourselves. It's a quiet but powerful statement. I don't need to force growth. I can allow it. It's in these moments of deliberate distance that growth shifts from effort to emergence. We stop trying to become something and start allowing ourselves to unfold. In that unfolding, we don't just grow, we expand into fuller, freer versions of who we are meant to be. When we're too close to something, a problem, a person, a goal, or even a dream, our perception becomes clouded. Details overwhelm us, emotions distort facts, noise drowns insight. In these moments, we often try to think our way through the confusion, pushing harder, analyzing more, obsessing over solutions, but clarity rarely arises from force. It comes from distance, the kind that allows us to step back far enough to see the bigger picture. Just as a painting becomes clearer when we stop staring at the brushstrokes and take a few steps back, so too do life's answers often emerge when we create space between ourselves and the situation. It's not that the answers aren't there, it's that we're too entangled in the situation to recognize them. Our minds are often too noisy. When we're emotionally invested or overwhelmed, we become reactive, consumed by short-term fears or frustrations. In this state, it's hard to distinguish between what we feel and what is real. That's why intentional distance can be so powerful. It gives us a mental and emotional reset, allowing us to step out of the emotional fog and regain perspective. Think about the times when you've taken a walk after a heated argument, or when a problem that seemed impossible at night felt manageable in the morning. That's the power of psychological distance at work. When we stop staring directly at the issue and allow our minds to wander, or even rest, our subconscious gets to work, sorting, processing, and reorganizing. Insight often appears not when we chase it, but when we give it room to arrive. In that sense, distance is not about avoiding decisions, but about creating the conditions for better ones. In relationships, clarity from distance is especially critical. When emotions run high, whether it's love, anger, disappointment, or fear, our judgment is easily distorted. We interpret actions through the lens of our own emotional needs, biases, or wounds. Taking space doesn't mean abandoning someone or cutting them off. It means stepping back long enough to ask yourself, what's really happening here? What's mine? What's theirs? And what's the truth between us? From that place of separation, emotional reactivity gives way to honest insight. Clarity also applies to goals and ambitions. Sometimes we chase something so relentlessly that we forget why we started. We're on autopilot, ticking boxes, climbing ladders, driven by momentum rather than meaning. But when we step away, whether it's taking a sabbatical, going offline, or simply pausing to breathe, we create a vantage point. From there, we can ask, is this still aligned with who I am? Does this still matter to me? Have I grown out of this goal without realizing it? These questions don't arise when we're stuck in motion, they surface when we're still. Another vital aspect of clarity through distance is the ability to see patterns. When we're immersed in daily life, we often miss the recurring dynamics that shape our decisions, the habits, beliefs, and fears that quietly steer us. But from a distance, patterns become visible. We begin to recognize cycles, the way we always say yes when we mean no, the way we sabotage opportunities, the way we repeat emotional loops in relationships. This awareness is the first step toward change, and it almost always comes from space, not from pressure. Distance also grants us emotional neutrality, which is essential for making wise choices. When we're too close to something we desperately want or fear losing, our decisions are clouded by attachment. But when we step back, we create a buffer between our desires and our discernment. We become less reactive and more reflective. We move from impulse to intention, and in that space, we begin to see things as they are, not as we wish they were or fear they might be. Ultimately, clarity is not something we chase, it's something we invite. And we do that by making room for it. Just like muddy water becomes clear when left to settle, so too does the mind find clarity when it's not constantly stirred. Distance allows our thoughts to settle, our feelings to soften, and our vision to sharpen. In that quiet space, what was once confusing becomes simple. What felt impossible becomes actionable. What seemed chaotic begins to make sense, not because the situation changed, but because we did, through the quiet, intentional act of stepping away. It's often said that we don't know what we have until it's gone, but more accurately, we don't understand the true value of something until we're at a distance from it. Proximity creates familiarity, and with familiarity comes a kind of blindness. The people, places, experiences, and even blessings we encounter daily can start to feel ordinary simply because they are near, routine, or assumed. But distance, whether physical, emotional, or temporal, has a way of awakening appreciation, of helping us see with fresh eyes what we once overlooked. When we step away from something, we gain perspective. What we once took for granted can become luminous in hindsight. The laughter of a friend, the quiet support of a partner, the stability of a job, the simple beauty of our hometown, these things can seem unremarkable while we're surrounded by them. But give it time, give it space, and something shifts. We begin to feel what was hidden beneath the surface, the comfort, the love, the quiet strength. Distance strips away our habitual indifference and reveals the deeper emotional value of what was once just normal. This process doesn't only apply to positive experiences. Distance also helps us reevaluate what no longer serves us. Sometimes we cling to relationships, jobs, or identities simply because they are familiar. But when we step back, we begin to see more clearly the emotional weight we've been carrying, the toxicity we've normalized, the limitations we've imposed on ourselves. Space gives us the courage to question, to discern, and to let go. Distance, in this sense, becomes a mirror not just reflecting what is good, but revealing what no longer fits who we're becoming. Distance also teaches us the value of time, not in the productivity sense, but in the existential one. When we reflect on the past from afar, we often find that the most valuable moments were the simplest ones: shared meals, quiet mornings, heartfelt conversations, laughter that came unforced. We begin to realize that value doesn't always come from achievement or status, but from connection, presence, and authenticity. These truths are easy to forget in the rush of daily life. It is only when we pause, when we look back from a place of distance, that their weight truly settles in. One of the most powerful effects of distance is how it reshapes our relationship with loss. Losing something or someone creates an involuntary distance, and though painful, it often leaves behind a sharper sense of what mattered most. The memories become more vivid, the lessons become more profound, the appreciation becomes more tender. Loss breaks us open, but it also deepens our capacity to value. In this way, distance becomes sacred. It gives form and clarity to what our closeness once dulled. Even in the creative or professional world, distance can redefine value. When we step away from a project, an artwork, or a goal, we gain the ability to assess it more objectively. What once felt urgent might now feel insignificant. What once seemed like failure might now be seen as necessary growth. What once appeared as weakness might now be recognized as humanity. This kind of revaluation is only possible when we allow ourselves to separate from our immediate attachment to outcomes. Through distance, we learn not just to judge, but to understand the full arc of meaning. Culturally, distance helps us reframe identity and tradition. Leaving one's country, for example, often awakens a deeper love for it or a clearer critique. Time away from family can intensify gratitude or expose old wounds. Living apart from a community can illuminate both what we miss and what we no longer align with. In every case, distance becomes a tool of redefinition, not erasure. It allows us to engage with people, places, and ideas on new terms, from a place of intentional understanding rather than unconscious closeness. Ultimately, when we create distance not out of avoidance, but out of awareness, we give ourselves the opportunity to assign value deliberately rather than inherit it blindly. We are no longer ruled by default attachments. We begin to ask, what truly matters to me now? What deserves my attention, my energy, my presence? And what was I clinging to simply because it was near? In this way, distance becomes not a void, but a vantage point from which we can finally see the true worth of the things, people, and moments that shape our lives. In a world that constantly tells us to move closer, to press in, to stay connected and involved at all times, choosing distance can feel counterintuitive, even rebellious. But as we've explored, distance is not disconnection, it is discernment. It is not avoidance, but awareness. It is the space where clarity emerges, healing begins, values realign, and growth takes root. Distance, when chosen with intention, becomes a source of wisdom, not weakness. We've seen how stillness is a form of strength, how space sharpens vision, how stepping away can deepen our appreciation and refine our direction. We've learned that digital silence can bring emotional presence, that growth isn't just about action, but about reflection, and that when we pause, we don't fall behind. We often catch up with ourselves. Distance, in this light, is not the enemy of connection, it's the architect of depth. Let us stop fearing distance as the absence of something. Let us begin to honor it as the presence of perspective. Let it be a sacred container for recalibration, for choosing again, for coming back not as who we were, but as who we've become. Let us step away not to escape life, but to return to it, more fully, more truthfully, and more awake. Because the truth is this: the power of distance isn't in what it takes us away from, but in what it brings us closer to. And when we embrace that, everything changes.